Okay, so here I'm going to do another stream, of course, while driving. I guess I don't have to say that anymore because you can see it now, but whatever. I hope you appreciate the nice visual feedback, but we're going to do Absolutist Philosophy, Episode 7. And this topic is very nuanced, so I was almost hesitant to do this one, but it's the Rule by Omission protocol, which means, or I often just call it Rule by Omission. But basically, this is a very nuanced and detailed concept that explains how you're controlled in society or in a contrivance state. Right, so the people actually in power, right, you sometimes hear this as an anecdote in general, like, you know, the real people in charge, to some extent, you don't even know who they are, right? There's a lot of figureheads, like the really powerful people or a lot of powerful people, they'd be some unknown person that you never hear about in the media and that you never know anything about, right? So you're not paying attention to them. But you focus on the figureheads. It's like the Elon Musk effect is a negative thing, like, it doesn't mean that he's a good guy or you have to agree with what he says or whatever, but he's very vocal about what he thinks. So it reveals a certain fallacy. Like, you might disagree with him and, oh, you want to protest his products and this and that, but you're actually punishing him for being honest and open about what he thinks. Do you know? Whereas everyone else would be fake or pretend, like, you know, they'll just try to be politically correct or... So in a way, political correctness, as much as it's a construct, you could say, of the media and things like that, in a way, it's people create that too, because you sort of desire it. You want people to pretend to be a certain way. In a way, you want to be controlled, right? It's like the social contrivance of you want to hear, or like you want people to say what you want to hear, right? Even if it's not true. It's like the false certainty versus uncertainty, the unwillingness to be puzzled. So you look at human history, people have that craving for a false absolute or some empirical structure, like they want to believe in God or they want to believe in some false absolute explanation for something, instead of recognizing that they just don't know, or, you know, people are unwilling to be puzzled, an absurdist concept. So what that means is you're basically in a position to be controlled by, again, false absolutes, non-accountable. Also, you're controlled by, basically you're controlled by the fact that, again, your belief systems, false absolute, all of this, but you also have the ability to consider, what was I going to say, like, okay, empirical authority, right, relies on a collective mass of people being initial-minded. So what does that mean? When I say initial, it means you're relying on your five senses. So what you see, what's in front of you, what you hear, all your initial perceptions, your five senses, not your thought or awareness, which are definitely very different for this reason. Like, you can be aware of anything. Like, you can be aware of the nature of human history. Like, oh, every era of human history has made mistakes and been controlled by some process, and we can look back and say, oh, how could people possibly have believed in that? Like, you know, whatever, Greek gods, and now we treat them as mythology, or some other, you know, things that were used to control people. right, certain fallacies and beliefs, and we're going to sacrifice animals to make it rain, or tribute to the gods, or whatever. Like, all these things we would ridicule, and like, how could people be that stupid, or how could people be controlled like that? So you'll see it in the past of others and ridicule that, but you won't see it in yourself and say, we're being controlled by a process right now too. And so you can identify that process, those processes, by like anything that isn't direct, right? Because objectivity and reality and truth are kind of boring. They don't make a specific case for a specific end, or have some, idyllic answer for everything, right? So you got to resist the temptation. If it sounds too good to be true, there's this God who watches over us, and heaven, if you behave a certain way, you go to heaven, and it's perfect. And that's a perfect example of it's too good to be true. No, there is no heaven, for the people you love and for yourself. There is no hell for people who wronged you. Like, it's nice, it might be what you want to believe, and again, it's not accountable because of death. And you might say, you don't know what happens to people when they die, but it's kind of ironic. Like, you can observe what happens to people when they die, right? But it's the human ego that takes on another form. You can physically, observe what happens to a human body, decomposition. So we try to create a different standard for human beings, like, in everything. Like, we're special. We're animals who have slightly greater intelligence, slightly greater self-awareness. Nothing wrong with that, but the way that it's framed is negative in the sense because it allows you to be controlled by it, because your ego is so big. So like, you're a peasant working for promises of heaven, right? I always talk about that that logical razor of mine. So again, empirical authority, a power structure, relies on you being initial-minded and not aware of the larger process at work, right? So you treat everything as false absolute, and then you're controlled by your perceptions. So whatever is shown to you, you take for granted at face value, and you react to it, right? Like, even from the media or something like that. But you realize it's carefully curated, and they're only going to show you what they want you to see, but you still take it at face value. Whereas you could be self-aware and say, well, they're only showing me that, but I'm aware that behind closed doors, all these other things are probably going on. You're just not aware of them. So you see how difficult that is to frame. Like, you're right in saying that, right? There probably are all kind of things happening behind closed doors, but just because you can't see it, or just you're not aware of it, right? So like, people wait for that. Like, everything is perfect until something is revealed, and then only that is flawed, and there's no other larger process at work. So like, you're completely beholden to what is shown to you. Like, even Donald Trump's a good example. I always have this expression, don't give any man a monopoly on sin, because like, people say, he's so bad or terrible or whatever, but it's selective. Like, you're focusing, he's bad, he's flawed, but George Bush is an unconvicted war criminal for Iraq, and Obama dropped so many bombs in the Middle East that we ran out of bombs for a second there. Like, so it's not that he isn't bad, Trump, necessarily, but it's selective. They're all out to get him, but they ignore, right, everybody else. You're right. So that's the issue. The issue isn't, whether you like Trump or not. The issue is, why are you only injecting now, right? Like, you dislike him, but you ignored everything else. Maybe because you're too young, that you weren't even old enough at that point. That's fine, but you understand the big picture. Like, don't select out, right? It's not that he's good, it's that everyone else, it creates this idyllic standard. Like, everyone's perfect, and then the big bad guy came along. Not that it's a flawed process. So the ironic thing is, somebody like that might be, he might be out for his own interests instead of the corporate interests that are typically, the power structure's interests. So it's like, if somebody rises to a position of power and they're selfish, and they're like, I only care about myself, they'll upset a lot of the elites, right? So again, the objection isn't that, they're out for the American people's interests, that's why the media hates them. No, it could be something else. They could just be out for their own interest instead of the elite, the power structure represented by the corporate-owned media to a degree, right? So just by being selfish, you would still expose that, because they're upset about their interest not being served, even if, you're not doing it for the right reason. It still can expose the same thing. That's the whole irony of it. So somebody who's totally selfish will still expose the system, because the system wants a piece of it too, and they would normally get what they want instead. So, and again, it's not like the media and all of this is out for your interest either. No, they have their interest that they want to be served, but they pretend like, oh, they're looking out for you. But all those other years, all those other times, they're not looking out for you. Right, so again, be weary of the selective nature of that. So like whenever something happens, this is the immediate reaction that I would have objectively. Like you hear about, oh, this scandal, this conspiracy. I don't think about that particular one. I think about, oh, imagine all the other ones that we're not hearing about and that we pretend don't happen just because. So the solution would either be much greater accountability, like you got to watch everything everyone does, like politicians and stuff all the time. We got to have a 24/7 body cam on them, or, you know, not that extreme, but either that or just don't take it seriously and be aware, like, you know, healthy skepticism. You assume that, like, okay, everybody, it's like certain social stigma that operates this way too. So for example, you know, everyone puts up a front in society, like, oh, how you present yourself. And so the defining factor there is somebody, you know, it's like how self-awareness invalidates the process. Somebody is self-aware of the nature of something. Like, okay, you're going out in public, so now you dress a certain way and you look just right and you act a certain way because you know other people are judging you. So now it becomes a contest of contrivance. It's not a reflection of reality. It's like, oh, who can put up the best front? And so, oh, the people who seem bad maybe just don't care. It's not about whether they're better or worse. It's like, oh, they just don't care about appearances. It just doesn't matter to them. Versus other people who are willing to put more effort to keep up appearances, right? But the reality is the same. So it's like there's things that people do in private that you know everyone does, but we all pretend like, oh, it's somehow shameful or negative or whatever, like self-stimuli acme, if you want to call it, or whatever. But just there'll be certain things like, oh, everybody thinks that, or everyone does that, but we pretend like they're bad or that we would never do it in a public social setting, but yet we would still do it, or we know that other people are doing it. So you're aware of the nature of the process, but you still pretend something else. And it also goes to the point of, you know, just again, there's a few fallacies here. Like, if you're aware of the nature of a process, or that there even is a process, this is an expression I had too. If being aware of the nature of a process invalidates it, then the awareness isn't the issue, it's the process. Like, again, oh, they're just doing this for this reason. Oh, you're just wearing makeup because you're appealing to the stimuli acme, or oh, you're just socially interacting because you want them to buy a product from you or something. Like, you could break down everything like that, and now it's the degree of overcompensation that's defining. So like being aware of that seems negative, like, oh, you're thinking cynically or that's somehow your fault. But if that invalidates the process, like, oh, they're only doing this because of blank, which everything you could point to some motivation for, but now it becomes like how obvious you make that or how much you overcompensate, but it's still the same measure and the same process underneath it. So it's the degree of overcompensation. Oh, who can contrive best, but it's the same process. So if you're not happy with the process, or if being aware of it is negative, the defining factor is, oh, how aware of it can you make? How aware of it does somebody make you? By being neutral in their performative aspects and just being direct, oh, that's somehow negative because you're aware of the nature of the process. But by being fake and placing undue emphasis and overcompensating and appealing to ego and social contrivance, they make it less obvious, so that's somehow better. But it's the same process underneath. So in a way, from this objective perspective, you would rather somebody be direct, rather reveal the nature of the process, and then decide for yourself if it's a good process or not, instead of trying to fool you or exploit you through it, right, and sort of deceive you in a way, overcompensate, even though that is what many people desire. So again, if simply being aware of the nature of a process is negative, then don't blame the awareness, but blame the process, like social interaction and stuff. Like, oh, people, like social interaction is nothing more than self-insistence, whether it be for your self-interest, like, oh, you're just trying to achieve something through other people, like you want something from them, even if in an overextended way, or, you know, you are insisting upon your own ignorance, like the limited life experience that you've had, which is a myopic slice of everything that you could have experienced possibly. You're just insisting upon things and using that as a basis of value. Like, oh, you experienced this when you were younger, or you're familiar with this, therefore it has more value. So you'll insist upon that. So you're just insisting upon your limited non-choice reaction experiences, your ignorance, and giving a special value, but there is no real standard behind it. It's just like everything that you've experienced is more valuable because you've experienced it, and everything that you haven't is less because you haven't, right? So you're just insisting upon yourself, and the other notion that goes along with this is the simple fact that again, being aware of the nature of a process, again, social interaction, everything is incentivized. They're just doing it for, there's three interpretations. They're doing it for an incentive, like, oh, they just want to have sex with you, or oh, they just want money, or they want you to buy something. Or number two could be they're just insisting upon their own ego or ignorance, insistence, like I said. Some myopic fragment of reality that they've experienced is therefore more valuable, so they'll insist upon it, right, and appeal to their familiarity, ego, etc. And then the third one could be either self-interest or the third one could just be like collective knowledge of like, well, if you really wanted to know some piece of information, you could just look it up, or you have all these resources now that make social interaction obsolete, but people still insist upon it, like undue emphasis, like the false absolute to specify concept that I talk about, which is false absolute to specify, like human beings are obsolete and negligible, and again, they insist upon their own ignorance and ego. But if you have true value for a standard, even by the same measure that you would apply to what you get from people, like technology is better, or the collective is better. So if you talk about like, oh, the internet versus people should stop using their computer so much and interact with people. But all the interaction you could do with people, first of all, you could do it over the internet to a greater degree. Like, would you rather choose between everyone in the world, 8 billion people to talk to, or whoever's in your local environment, right? It's like the old school stimuli acme interpretation. Back in my day, we used to go to diners and meet a girl there, and then they became our wife. Oh, so you mean the nearness postulate, where you insist upon something that you didn't have a choice because you had to settle for your local environment because you didn't have other options. So you're trying to glorify it into something more, but it's actually something less because you had less options and you insisted upon them as though they were more valuable, false absolute, right? Even if it's defined by simple geography and limitations like that, but you're treating it like an absolute. So no wonder there'd be a conflict of contrivance and struggle and divorces and stuff like that, because again, you're trying to pose an absolute and specify the stimuli acme to one person only, but the circumstance of how you meet that person is very arbitrary and interchangeable because, it's based on something as simple as geography and a reactionary basis like that. And so the problem is that, again, what's the lesson there is false absolute to value. It doesn't mean you shouldn't, engage in the stimuli acme or whatever, but if you specify it and treat it as though it's an absolute, you have to be aware of the origin point. Oh, so the origin point is arbitrary reactionary nearness postulate, so therefore it's not absolute, but if you treat it as absolute, right, such that you would specify it, then that creates a contradiction. So the other thing is, again, like that specified value, right, where people do that. So like, would you rather have the internet, would you rather be on the internet, let's say, or using technology, which is objective and neutral and, always there for you, kind of, in a way, like it doesn't, unconditional, and it has all the information in human history and all the collective knowledge and everything at your fingertips. You have like, this collective human consciousness and value and all the works of fiction and all the, insights and everything in one spot. You have all that versus social interaction with one person who's going to insist upon their limited life, ego, ignorance, insistence, all that. So when people use terms now like desensitized and stuff like that, yes, you would be desensitized to humanity because you have this alternative, even by the same measure, like all of humanity's greatest ideas and works and resources are all at your fingertips, like whether it be the internet or through technology. So would you rather have everything ever at your fingertips, or would you rather have a limited, myopic, egotistical, self-insistent single person that you have to tolerate just because they're in your local immediate environment? So this creates the problem of like, that's what people typically do through social interaction. You're trying to place undue emphasis on something, on a person or a specific, area, whatever. That you're trying to place undue emphasis when, again, that analogy is difficult to argue. Like, oh, would you rather have everything at your fingertips and, all the knowledge in the world and in human history versus one myopic, limited fragment? And so you understand that that's the false absolute to value and specify. Same thing like with the antiquated standards, that you would have like a pretense that would have been used. Oh, like back in my day, we were so hardworking. Well, if you were, then why not go back to an era before that? Even like stop using the technology that you had in your era and go back to working even harder then, if that's the standard base of value. And like, oh, now today everybody's lazy because technology makes everything easier. But it's like, okay, then don't use it then and make everything harder for yourself just to prove something and gratify. But oh no, that's not what it was really about. So like the older generation always gets upset because, oh, they were controlled by some pretense of gratification that didn't actually serve a purpose, but they were forced to pretend it did and feel good about it to overcompensate for the fact that something was more tedious than it is now. It's like, oh, they worked harder, but it's a zero-sum process. If they could have worked less and they had the means and technology to do it, they would have done it. Like, and why not? It's the same zero-sum process. So again, they'll attach some gratification to something, but now they would no longer do it or need it. And, if technology removes the need, then why not? It's like every era insists upon their mode of control, that, oh, they were controlled by some pretense or some lie or some, gratification because they had to be, because they didn't have the option. Now, if you have the option to not do it because you have better technology and does everything for you, that's just a net positive. You could just choose not to use that and still make it harder for yourself just to try to prove something, but, what does it really prove? Right, so you're insisting upon a lesser state just because you were forced to endure it, basically, and acting like that's somehow superior, right, because you were in a lesser state of technology and options and things like that, instead of actually valuing the result, the outcome standard. But no, getting back to the original topic in term of rule by omission, basically, again, the empirical authority would rely on the fact that you rely on your senses and your initial perception. So whatever is shown to you can control you. Like, if something is hidden from you, like, that's all it would take. Okay, if you're not aware of something and it's not shown to you directly and obviously, it doesn't exist. And if something is put right in your face, you're going to react to it. And it's the way that the media can control you too. They might not control exactly what you say, although to some extent repetition, etc. can do that. But instead they'll control the topic. So you'll keep hearing about this topic over and over, and you won't hear about another topic. So by simply omitting one topic, right, like they won't report on one subject. So it's not that they're saying something specifically, oh, you should feel this way or that way, because that you could always come to yourself. But no, they're just not reporting on something, effectively censoring it or minimizing it, and then they're reporting on something else a ton, so they can control the topic of conversation. Now, everybody's going to be talking about the one topic that they keep reporting on, and nobody's going to be talking about the one that they're not, right? Regardless of what you're saying about it, right? They still control the topic. So let me go back to the origin point of where I came up with this term, actually, rule by omission. It's like a leader giving a speech, right? You can think about dystopian or dictatorship or something like that. So what would a leader in that kind of environment do? Would they say, this is like a Dr. Breen line that I made fun of in this context, actually, from Half-Life 2, where he says, he's talking to, I think, the citizens, and he says, right, he's doing one of his Breen casts to the public, and he says, this Gordon Freeman guy is on the loose, and some people have referred to him as the one free man, the opener of the way. So he's like praising the enemy. Why would he say that, right? Or you wouldn't even acknowledge him necessarily, right? But you also wouldn't give him that benefit of praise or whatever. So like, what would you do, like in China? Would China, or anywhere, whatever, but would they acknowledge dissent and say, oh, Xi Jinping is going to go up there and say, well, these dissidents are here and they're unhappy with it? No, they'll ignore them and pretend like they don't exist, right? Or sometimes use them as like a rallying cry, like false duality, but that's a real form of power. You just don't even acknowledge them. So you're giving a speech and oh, there's been this dissent and there's been these protests, you just censor them and you don't even acknowledge them. It's not that you would say, oh, they're so bad and we're going to stop them and squash them, because some people might be sympathetic towards them, right? You're not going to say anything. You'll just pretend they didn't happen. Everything's perfect. Everything's fine. And because, you control the media to some extent, then it's like it didn't happen. Or if somebody talks about it, then it feels like, oh, them going, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, or you're focusing on this thing that nobody else is doing. So it's a way that you're easily controlled by the ego, because the collective mass will insist upon themselves and their own ignorance as if it's their own idea, but your perceptions are constantly being controlled and influenced by media, etc. And then, so you understand that point is like, if you censor information, then people can only react to what you're telling them. So that's the easiest and most effective way to control people. So again, the speech by this dictator, or by this or by leader, right, dystopian, whatever, would be like, the speech would not, again, that would be the false duality. Either you say something positive about it, like, oh, those dissenters are really doing a good job protesting us, which you wouldn't do that. But even by saying something negative, you're still acknowledging them and making people aware of them, and maybe they'll sympathize or whatever, right? So you don't even acknowledge it, you just omit it altogether and pretend it didn't happen, right? And just censor it, and so you don't even acknowledge dissent at all. Right, so a similar application would be in everyday life and society. So everything is passed down, right? So you look at like, oh, this big corporate, enterprise that's owned by somebody who's taking vacations all the time, and if you were aware actively of everything that they, all their beliefs, like the Elon Musk effect, you'll never buy their product, you'll protest them. So what's the solution? They just stay in hiding and never tell you anything, and only say politically correct things, or just stay out of sight, out of mind. So now you're not offended by them. Not that what they think wouldn't offend you, it's just that you don't know what they think, or they won't share what they think, or they'll only put forth the pretense of what they think you want to hear. Right, so it's all artificial. So if only everybody was as open about what they think is Elon Musk, then you might have issue with a lot of them as well, but you only punish him for being open, whereas they're not. Right, so you're rewarding the wrong thing. I would appreciate at least that he's open about it, versus even if I disagree with whatever he says, right, it's like, would you rather them be open about it or not? Because then you're assuming the best of everybody else. It's like, right, one person says what they think and you disagree with it, and then everybody else just doesn't say anything and you're not aware of it, so it's not a topic. So you just assume that you wouldn't object to it if you did know what they think, or you just give them the benefit of the doubt, but you might disagree with them too. Like, they all have probably flaws and idiosyncrasies and things you might question, but because they just keep it out of sight, out of mind, then you don't question it. So here's an example of the trickle-down effect and rule by omission in practice, right? You'll get mad at the cashier in a grocery store, or take out your anger on them or whatever, but not the empirical structure behind them. So the owner of that same store or that same company is on vacation, and they're relaxing, and they're indulging and doing drugs or whatever, all right? They're just living their best life and indulging, but because they're out of sight, out of mind, you give them the benefit of the doubt, and they're not accountable. You're not upset at them that, oh, this disorganized, or this is, somehow flawed or whatever, right? You don't take it out on them. And again, you even give them the benefit of the doubt or whatever. Whereas the cashier in front of you, or the worker who's actually there, you take it out on them. You give them attitude. You bitch to them. You kind of, there's a way to do this trickle down of responsibility. Like, we'll make them the scapegoat, make them the focal point, and because they're in your initial perception, you'll focus on them. So any flaws are directed to them. Any anger and disgust, distaste is at them, even for the flawed, overextended process that they're, just following orders or, working, but you benefit that way. So again, the big corporate CEO is on their yacht somewhere just chilling, drinking wine, but you're taking out whatever frustration you have or whatever flaws of the company on the employee who is there, right? Whereas the owner is out of sight, out of mind. So let's flip that scenario and say, oh, the owner is working there. Now you might judge everything they do and criticize everything they do because they're exposed to your initial awareness. So whereas, right, so you're punishing them for almost being present. If they were there actually doing the work themselves or actively present, you might criticize everything they do and hyperfixate and focus on that. But because they're not there, now you give them the benefit of the doubt, or again, they're out of sight, out of mind, so you're not even thinking about them, and you give the cashier, the employee, a hard time for the overextended empirical authority structure that's in place. So, right, so you're using that as like a figurehead. Okay, just put some nice old lady who nobody's gonna, find objectionable there, right, to do this process, and that's what people would value, versus if you were there yourself, they would criticize you or attack you or, again, fixate on everything you do. So you could be the worst person ever, but, you're out of sight, out of mind, so people just assume the best and you can get away with whatever you want and not do anything and be exploitative and this and that. And all you have to do is give them some little prop, figurehead, identity politics kind of nonsense and just say, well, we're going to put some nice old lady or so whoever fits there's like a historical basis to this too, like, we'll put one of your own, lowest common denominator type thing, and then you do that, and so it's like, then people value that or respect that or defer to that, even though, again, you're exploiting it and you're kind of hiding behind that. So any frustrations will be directed towards them, not you, and meanwhile you profit from it. So again, it's the idea that you punish the initial, like, the owner who works at their own store or something all the time and they're there all the time, somehow you criticize that, but you don't criticize the one who's, again, out of sight, out of mind, on a yacht somewhere. So you're focusing only on what's immediately aware to your perceptions, but not the larger process that you're at least aware exists. So the solution is, don't do the work yourself and don't do it, don't be there yourself, even though that should be a positive. The goal is, the solution is actually, just stay out of sight, out of mind, and you'll be better off, because people won't, and you can get away with anything then. And again, the trickle down effect, blame the employees and stuff like that. So again, even though you're aware of the nature of a process, you won't actually think about that. You'll always do the trickle down effect. So whatever's presented to you is what you react to and treat as absolute value, even though it's nothing more than a technique. So going back to the, again, awareness of a process, if simply being aware of a process invalidates it, then that's the fault of the process, not the awareness. Or if, even acknowledging that there is a process, that like everything is a process, would be somehow negative. So here's how you're controlled in this way, this way, and this way. And if you're aware of it actively, that's somehow negative or cynical, and it's your fault for being aware of it. But that is the process, whether you're aware of it or not. So like, it's negative. So the fact that you react negatively to that awareness or somebody reflecting it shows you the problem, but you're specifying to them, it's their fault that they're not overcompensating or distracting from it, or it's their fault that they're aware of it, not the fault of the process for actually being that way, right? So you're kind of treating it as though the level of contrivance and overcompensation is the defining factor. So it's like, you're aware the process applies to everyone, but then you only focus on the ones who don't overcompensate for it or distract from it, and blame them for making you aware of it, rather than being aware of the process universally. Again, whether it bothers you or not, you specify it to that. again, to like the awareness level. And then you also let me think of a few other ways to explain it. Again, you get the trickle down effect, you get, again, the out of sight, out of mind effect, that somehow that's a net positive. You get the negative of the initial, because again, people are only going to react to what's immediately in front of them. So if you're just, again, stay away from that, now you're perfect, right? You can kind of like deify yourself. Oh, you're like a god-like perfect being, because people defer to invisible authority and again assume the best in all of this, versus holding it accountable. They only hold accountable directly what's in front of them, or they'll accept whatever myopic, carefully curated image is there. So it makes you wonder about some of that. Like, I always say that with ads, like, oh, an ad is just trying to get you to buy something, so then it should never work because you're aware of the nature of the process. So it's self-defeating. Or again, even like, oh, the media department of a company, oh, they're just trying to keep up good appearances, so they're never going to tell you something bad, even if something bad does happen. So you wouldn't take it seriously, right? So if you're aware of the nature of the process, then it no longer works on you, so it doesn't matter. You wouldn't require or desire it to be controlled by it, or you wouldn't take it seriously. You'd be aware of the nature of the process. You'd even identify the fact that it's necessary to have that. Would be negative, because that means that, oh, like you have something to cover up, basically. And so again, like, oh, that only exists because of what, right? Because of blank. Like, they're trying to portray themselves in a positive way. But, you know, the fact that they have to do that shows you that they're only going to show you the positive. They're going to minimize the negative. Like, so again, if you were just aware of the process, which anybody can be on an objective level, but it makes it difficult to, you know, contrive and say seriously whether you should or not. So, like, oh, behind closed doors, you know that this is a whole process. Like, oh, they went to school for years to try to do this social contrivance technique that they're doing, but you want to treat it at face value and it's genuine. And it's like, oh, that's part of their sales training. So if you were immediately aware of that and you know, saw, oh, they're doing this because they were trained to do this years ago, but yet you somehow just still desire that or treat it like face value. So you have, they're controlled by the process that you could be aware of, but you somehow just don't think about it or don't have active awareness of it in the moment. It's similar to the stigma effect that I call like awareness of history, that, oh, throughout human history, people have been so flawed and imperfect and immoral and fallen for every trick in the book. And so you would shoot down the credibility of people and be actively aware of that. Like, oh, you don't want to be tricked and fooled by the current contrivance process, or why not be ahead of it for once or aware of it for once. So you have the stigma effect of, like, be very weary of human nature and lack of credibility, instead of indignantly insisting on proud and being proud of it or whatever. And so the other thing is the fact that, you know, again, your stigma effect, be aware, like, oh, throughout history, you know, people have fallen for this and this and this and believe all these things that weren't true, and, you know, so you're no different. You would fall for anything, or you would be tricked by so many different things, so be weary of that. And you also have, you can probably barely even see anything. Like, it might be darker on stream than it is even for real, but sometimes you get some deers and stuff on this road too. You have to be careful. There's one time a deer came in front of me, and then I just kept going straight, like right through it, and I didn't hit it. It ran away, but like I was trusting that it would move. It's like I didn't even try to move away because it kind of felt like the right thing to do. Right, like I literally put my fate in its hands, or its fate in whatever. Like, I was going, and then I just kept going. I didn't try to swerve or move. And I trusted that it would move, and it did. But yeah, well, what else can we say with this? Just, again, what's presented to you, you take as absolute. So all it takes to control you and your perception is, oh, we just censor something. It's like this weird benefit of doubt and normalcy that we give to people. oh, people would never, let's treat people in an egotistical, positive way. Like, oh, people are good and they would never do anything negative. And then only when we are made aware of something negative do we see that. Instead of realizing, oh, throughout human history, don't give them benefit of the doubt. It's the same fallacy of like, to the end of like, so we have to restrain them. But, right, like people are not to be trusted. We take those same people with that same nature, right, some of them, and we empower them to that same end. So, again, the premise is that people are people that also need to be restrained. And we kind of give them this special fallacy of like, oh, they're the anointed, or they're so good, or you should hold power accountable. Like, okay, you have this power for this reason. Opposite is like, you feel like you have to justify yourself to power, or, defer to it. Like, oh, they're right because they're in power. Not that we should hold them accountable to be right, such that they deserve to be in power, like, or that they validate it, right? Not that, oh, they're right because they're in power, and so we should do what they say, and we have to appease them, instead of, no, they have the privilege of being in. Sort of like it creates the effect too, where the people suck up to them and stuff like that because they're already in that position. But the way you're controlled, again, the initial perception. So again, you would be aware of the nature of the process, right? Of any process. So again, the fact that there is a process would be somehow negative, like, oh, everything is a process, this is a process, that's a process, right? Or the fact that being aware of the non-accountable false absolute, like, oh, it's love and it's meant to be, not that, oh, it's just a way to control you, it's a social construct, way to kind of limit the stimuli acme to one person, or, oh, it's God, so just don't think about it, or, oh, it's it's some social gratifying thing, like egotism and human emphasis, right? So all these things that bypass logic and reason, and then it comes down to the same process anyway, dependent, overextended pretense that I've talked about. So what you need to understand is that, okay, everything is a process, and you can be aware of the nature of it. So, oh, this is just a zero-sum process to achieve this end. And it's a way that it's socially controlled and all of this. So it works that same way, whether you're aware of it or not. So you just want to be bypassed and distracted from it, right? So again, you're controlled by perceptions, and you create a contest of contrivance. Who can overcompensate and distract you from that process the best? Punish those who reveal the nature of the process. And then you also have, again, controls you, even though deep down you're aware of the nature of the process. Like, oh, these politicians are probably doing something behind closed doors. They could be corrupt. But until we hear specifically about it, we just believe it's happening when it's told to you, when it's made of its big spectacle out of it. So if it's just hidden from you, right, it's just not shown to you, now you'll pretend like it didn't happen and it doesn't exist. And so you can be aware of all the flaws, tendencies, if you fact that, again, you look at it, you can be aware of the larger process, and just basically puts you in a position to be in control just like that. And so, again, you can be aware of the process and then counteract it or choose it, even if you still want to be subject to it. But or this one thing is like, oh, that applies to everybody all the time. That just might be more conspicuous or obvious or whatever. So, right, don't make it about just one person because, oh, they make you aware of the process, or they, what happens is, and then people get used to it and they kind of crave it. Oh, they want to be controlled, they want to be distracted, right, because they're so used to it, or they project that in everything. So neutrality and unconditional, we still treat it as though an absolute because we want pretense and overcompensation socially, but it'll be projected. So neutrality and unconditional would be projected as an incentive, even when there isn't one there. And again, the person doesn't feel the need to do anything because they don't feel the need to place an end, On the other hand, those who do have an incentive, right, this is like my concept of opposite interpretation. Somebody who has an incentive overcompensates and places undue emphasis, even though that seems positive maybe at face value, right? Oh, they have an incentive, that's why they're overcompensating and being all nice and social, undue emphasis. And then the one who seems maybe rude or isn't placing any emphasis will be projected as, oh, inability to achieve that, not that they have no incentive, or somehow it's a negative, even though they're being neutral and not being artificial to achieve an end. So they're not placing undue emphasis because they don't. Yeah, the final point is, again, just the initial awareness of the process is such that, again, what's presented to you versus what is, you are aware this could be happening or this is likely happening, but again, just that general awareness of human tendency and nature, and aware that, okay, this is the nature of the process and we should be weary of it,